Hello. Just in case nobody has told you yet, welcome to the back half of 2024. I hope your year is going well. I have spent most of my year watching movies. To be specific, 43 new release movies in the first half of 2024. And I would love nothing more than to spend like 3 hours talking about each one. But in this video, I'm just going to talk about my 10 favorites, which, spoiler alert, does not contain Madam Web.
Gaming Cookie Guy
Entertainment.
We're going to jump right in at number 10. We have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, directed by Wes Ball. While I don't think this movie was quite as good as the trilogy that preceded it, it doesn't look as good as those movies, and of course it's missing the fantastic Andy Serkis performance. There was still a lot to like about this installment. I really liked seeing a world of the apes. I feel like in these last couple Planet of the Apes movies, we've kind of focused more on humans, and it was nice seeing a planet of the apes and how their culture has evolved over the generations. It took me some warming up, but I also came around to our new lead character, Noah, as portrayed by Owen Teague. I think he went on a great hero's journey in this movie, and also shout out to the Orville's own Peter Macon as Raka, turning in probably my favorite performance of this movie. I don't know 100% if I'm on board for what they were setting up at the end of this movie, but I do know I liked this movie, and that so far, the Planet of the Apes in the modern age have not disappointed me.
What a wonderful day!
At number 9 is a movie I had a really tough time placing on my list. It's a very complex movie, and to be honest, I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it, but I knew it had to be somewhere in this top 10. It is Challengers, directed by Luca Guadagnino. Now hear me out, please, because if you've heard anything about this movie without actually seeing it, you've probably heard it described something like the sexy tennis Zendaya three-way movie. And that's not entirely incorrect, but it does sell this movie really short of what it's doing. This movie is a very complex deep dive into the relationship between three characters that just happens to be explored through the lens of tennis and sex, sometimes in that order. Zendaya, Mike Feist, and Josh O'Connor are at the absolute top of their games in this movie. It is like impossible to describe just how subtly this movie gets you hooked on what's going on. And then suddenly you realize you're on the edge of your seat and like your heart is exploding over just like a quick glance that characters are shooting over to each other. It's insane. And I personally cannot wait for the sequel in 50 years when they bring in a fourth person and they discover pickleball.
So you don't know what tennis is?
What is it?
It's a relationship.
At number 8 is the movie Musica, and I hate how white I sound while saying that. I promise I'm a little Puerto Rican. This movie is from writer, director, and actor Rudy Mancuso. Musica is easily the biggest surprise of the year for me so far. This movie was not even close to being on my radar even after it was released, so I'm happy that it got recommended to me and then I gave it a shot, because this is easily one of the most visually creative live action movies I've seen in a long time, maybe ever. Really the only thing that holds this movie back for me, from being even higher on my list and being something that I truly love and can't stop raving about, is its pretty standard rom-com plot. Like, it's not an issue, it's not a problem or anything, but like, say you combine the visual style of this movie with an interesting story, you'd have one of my favorite movies of all time. Whereas if you combine this movie's plot with less interesting visual storytelling, it's probably something I'd forget about in like a month. But the fact that it's still this high on my list just shows how interesting and dynamic the visuals of this movie are. Not to mention the music of Musica. It's also fantastic.
For as long as I can remember, everyday regular sounds, I turn into rhythm.
At number 7 is the newest addition to this top 10. Like, literally, I watched this movie on June 30th. It is the latest movie from Poor Things director Yorgos Lanthimos. It is Kinds of Kindness. So here's something I learned about Kinds of Kindness only 15 minutes before going in to actually watch the movie. It is an anthology. It is comprised of 3 completely different and separate stories, but they all star the same cast of excellent actors. Jesse Plemons, Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Margaret Qualley, Hong Chow, just to name a few. If I had to try and connect them together using a theme, it would probably be something along the lines of desperately wanting control while at the same time desiring control over yourself. And this is especially true in the first story of this movie, which I think is my favorite. I think is the best, headlined by a truly fantastic Jesse Plemons performance. I almost wish this was the whole movie, but then again, I'm kind of glad we got left wanting more. Part 2, though, unfortunately, was probably the weakest of the 3 by quite a large margin. I think it had an ending that really missed the mark. And of course, you had the third part, which is somewhere in the middle of the other 2. I think the third part is just pretty solid all the way through. This being an anthology movie, and especially with all 3 parts being so separate but so differing in quality, made it really hard to place on this list, but ultimately, I knew it had to make an appearance on this list, and based off the strength of part 1 alone, I'm going to put it at number 7 for now. Although with this being the freshest movie in my mind, it is prone to kind of changing and settling somewhere else.
Skinny men are the most ridiculous thing there is. We've gone over this before. You must put on a few pounds. I told you that last time.
At number 6 is Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, directed by the great George Miller. Now, let's be honest, this feels like a movie where I'm either already preaching to the choir or you're just not on board with these kinds of movies. But take it from someone who is a convert from the not a fan of dystopian sci-fi, I really enjoyed this movie. And while it would have been nice for them to turn this around a bit faster, for Charlize Theron to get to reprise her role, I think they did a fantastic job casting young Furiosa to the point where I genuinely could not tell where they swapped from Ayala Brown to Anya Taylor-Joy. Though the real standout for me here has to be Chris Hemsworth as Dementus. I forget sometimes that he can actually act. He is having such a fun time playing this manic character under this giant schnoz. Having said all that, I will warn the Fury Road diehards that it doesn't quite measure up under direct comparison, especially with some of the CG shots, and it also does that prequel thing I don't like, where it feels like it needs to check every box heading into the next movie. But if you're down for Diet Fury Road, then I promise you will have that thirst quenched.
I want a meeting of the warlords. Me, him, the people eater, that idiot bullet farmer, high noon at the Citadel, 3 days from now.
At number 5 is a movie called Problemista, directed by Julio Torres. And in a lot of ways, this movie is what I wanted Musica to be. It is a movie from a very creative first-time director who has something new to bring to the table visually, but whereas Musica didn't quite hook me with its story, Problemista really did. Problemista is also very much helped along by a great performance from Tilda Swinton, who's doing this crazy, hateable, and sympathetic thing as Alejandro's terrible boss, who happens to be the only person standing between him and deportation. Now, after watching this movie, I went back and watched Julio Torres' special called My Favorite Shapes, and you can clearly see his offbeat comedy style bleeding over from that project and being amplified into this movie. I think that's really cool to see the progression there, but of course, I had not seen that before going into this, so if you're not familiar with Julio Torres' work, you'll still like this movie. There's just a lot to enjoy here. It is a story about a person trying to follow the classic American dream, but in modern America.
They don't want to sponsor me anymore. I'm actually from El Salvador.
Oh, El Salvador. Pupusas.
Yes.
And those nuns they killed in the 80s, yes.
Right.
At number 4 is... 4. At number 4 is a movie with probably the dopest soundtrack I've heard all year. It is I Saw the TV Glow, directed by Jane Schoenbrunn. Now, a small caveat, I suppose, out of all the movies on my top 10 list, This is probably the one I can't just give like a blanket recommend, you'll enjoy it if you see it kind of thing, because I think this movie is very specific. It's one you're going to either be on board with, or it might be one you just hate. It just so happened that this movie really struck a chord with me. And at this point, I would try and like describe what the movie's about so you can see why that might have happened. But with this movie, it's so hard to do that. Like on the surface, I will say it's like a horror movie that's about a TV show blurring the lines between fiction and reality, but also that's not what the movie's about at all. So I don't know what to tell you. I will say it is a movie that had me collect my jaw from the floor once the credits were rolling. Justice Smith has firmly cemented himself as one of my favorite actors to watch and somebody who I will watch whatever they appear in from now on. I normally don't go to movies that I think might scare me. So I'm glad I went to this one. But what I was not expecting to walk away with was a movie that will haunt me on so much of a deeper emotional level.
What about you? Do you like girls?
I don't know.
Boys?
I think that I like TV shows.
And so we've officially arrived at the top 3. The first movie to make it onto the podium is Drive Away Dolls, directed by Joel Coen. I first saw the trailer for this movie in like July, maybe August of 2023, and at the time it had a September 2023 release date. And right from that first trailer, I knew this was appointment viewing for me. This is something that was at the top of my watch list. So you can imagine my disappointment when it was delayed all the way to February 2024 due to the SAG-AFTRA strike. So finally, after like 4 extra months of waiting for this movie to come out, I finally got to see it. And you would think after all that time waiting, after all the suspense building, it might not have lived up to expectations, but I am so glad that it did. It's got that amazing Coen Brothers touch that is often imitated, but never duplicated. This movie follows Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan's characters on a road trip in a car that, unbeknownst to them, contains some very precious cargo. And I could give you 200 guesses as to what the MacGuffin in this movie was, and you would still not even come close. This movie is so sharp at every point. The editing, the writing, the shots, the acting. I am certain if it had come out in 2023 as scheduled, it would have been one of my favorite movies of that year too. Cherry on top, bonus points, cameos from 2 of my favorite actors, Matt Damon and Pedro Pascal. Just sign me up.
We just want to locate your friends. They inadvertently took something that belongs to us. We don't want to hurt them.
They're not my friends. Hurt them as much as you want.
Earning the silver medal at number 2 is a movie that made me question the very future of movies, but not in the way you think. It's The Fall Guy, directed by David Leitch. How did this movie flop at the box office? How did that happen? Like, genuinely, how? It did everything right. It got a fun and creative director in David Leitch. It landed 2 charismatic and pretty big stars. I would consider them bankable. It got Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. It was positively reviewed. It kicked off the entire summer movie season, and it landed with a thud. And I don't know why. But I'm going to put that behind me. I'm going to put that existential crisis of what is happening to movies and blockbuster cinema behind me, and I'm just going to talk about this movie that I love for a second. Because this is everything that I could ever want out of a blockbuster movie. Creative action, good jokes, charismatic leads with some decent chemistry, Taylor Swift songs. It's got everything. And maybe number 2 is too high. It might end up lower on my list, but it just speaks to how we don't see this kind of movie anymore. How I don't just get to go to a movie theater and be entertained for a couple hours. I really hope the financial failure of this movie doesn't teach Hollywood only the wrong lessons. I hope we can still get more movies like The Fall Guy because this movie is just such a great time.
You got this. You're the one.
Why you gotta say that? Why you gotta say that?
You've done this a million times.
And so have you. You know, you just jinxed it. You just jinxed it!
Dad, I need the...
And so just like that, we have reached number one, the gold standard, my favorite, and dare I call it what it actually is, the best movie of 2024. Say it with me, Unfrosted, directed by Jerry Seinfeld.
They got a fruit-filled pastry, Dingus.
Dingus? Who is a dingus?
No, it's Dune Part 2. Obviously, it's Dune Part 2. It's almost boring how much it's Dune Part 2. Here's the tea, though. I didn't really care for the first Dune movie. Even on rewatch in preparation for watching this second movie, it's just not a movie I was particularly interested in. So I am so happy I stuck with it, and I still went to see Part 2 because just, wow. Everything about this movie is basically perfect. Like, even the memes coming out of this movie are great. Timothée Chalamet has such a great hero's transformation. Like, you can so clearly see everything, every thought going through that character's head from start to finish, how much he changes, how much he has to sacrifice to go through that change, what is at stake in this world. You see it all through his performance. On the other side of that, in a smaller role, but no less impactful, was Austin Butler's character, who is in a sea of amazing supporting performances from all the actors involved. It is visually and sonically second to none. It is an epic film that we get maybe once every generation. Like, one day, people will look back on this movie in this year, and I will get to say that I got to watch Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 on opening night. So maybe it's the boring pick, maybe it's the safe pick, but it is the correct pick. It is my favorite movie of 2024 so far.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
But that's just my list. Please let me know in the comments, what is the best movie you've seen this year? Seriously, recommend me something. I would love to check it out. Is there anything that's coming in the back half of the year that might supplant Dune Part 2? I mean, we got Deadpool Wolverine. We got maybe Wicked. Honestly, it's probably going to be something I haven't even heard of yet. I'd be surprised if anything could take the crown from Dune's head, but then again, being surprised is part of why I love going to the movies. And with that, I just hope you have a great rest of the year. Go watch something cool, and we will reconvene come January. I'll see you then.